Let's do it.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for another Kivu Coffee Break. My name is Nick Steinman, and joining me today are Josh McDonald and Blake Lerner from Kivu's Burlington, Vermont office. Like ransomware, a business email compromise is something that Kivu is seeing more often when investigating a client environment. Typically, bad actors are only looking for financial gain, but sometimes these actors are also looking to exfiltrate your company's data. So, Josh, what are some common methods attackers use to compromise a company or an individual's email account?
Thank you, Nick. Typically, a user will receive a phishing email. In my experience, sometimes these phishing emails are sophisticated and require some form of examination to determine that they are not legitimate. The legitimacy can be determined through message header analysis. Other times, it can be quite evident an email is not legitimate. For example, the sender is external and the attacker attempts to make the domain similar to yours. Lots of times, these phishing emails contain links that harvest credentials.
That's really interesting. So Blake, what should a client do once they realize they're experiencing a business email compromise?
Yeah, great question, Nick. So the first thing is a client might be thinking is, how can I fix this right now? And that might lead them to making quick or potentially harmful decisions that could alter the forensic analysis. So the first thing I would say is to change all user passwords. Next, I would say to enable multi-factor authentication. And third, we would also want the client to ensure that all logs are preserved, as this is the only way a forensic analysis can be performed. And then finally, call Kivu. We have years of experience with business email compromise, and we know exactly how you're feeling and how to help you through this process.
That's great. So, as mentioned earlier, a bad actor is typically looking for financial gain. What are some ways a criminal attempts to squeeze money out of a breach like this?
So the attacker typically creates inbox rules to hide emails that the user has received with specific subject lines so that they can hide their activity. Usually, these attacks are financially motivated, so they will search the compromised user's email account for terms such as wire transfer to see if the compromised user is involved with wire transfers. They might send a phony invoice and steal the payment made to that account. In my experience, if an attacker cannot get money from a breach, they might pivot and use the compromised email address to send out additional phishing emails throughout the organization to potentially compromise a more valuable account.
That's really interesting. So, what does Kivu do to investigate a client breach?
Yeah, so actually, Kivu just recently finished developing our new Kivu Outlook Report Automation Tool, or Cora for short. This allows us to pull due diligence logs from a client environment and quickly determine any abnormalities. Once our analysts determine an indicator of compromise, Cora then allows us to easily pull these user audit logs for analysis. And then we can run a message trace for a phishing email, as well as who else may be at risk due to any potential circulation of that phishing email.
That's really interesting. So, what can someone do to prevent a business email compromise?
So Blake touched on this a little bit earlier, but some effective steps to take are enabling MFA, which is multi-factor authentication, but for all users, not adding exchange licenses to global admin accounts, and disabling legacy authentication methods such as PowerShell, IMAP, and POP3. It is also important to ensure that users are properly trained to spot phishing emails and know that links and external messages should not be clicked on until they are known to be legitimate. It is also helpful if external messages are identified to the user as external, and if the option is enabled in Outlook if you're using it to report phishing emails.
That's really interesting. So, is there anything a business should be doing proactively?
Oh, of course. So big thing, ensure that logging is enabled as well as the unified audit logs. In the event of an incident, these are going to be the most critical pieces of evidence. Also, ensure that these logs go back to the full 90 days, as the threat actor may have compromised the system prior to when you first recognized the activity. And for us to go back, the full spectrum of what Office 365 is giving us will help us really determine how they got in, how long they've been in, or what they've been doing in there. And you can also conduct your own due diligence investigations. You can go through your logs and look for any abnormal activity or shares being set up or abnormal logon locations. So you don't have to be the victim of an incident to be looking out for these things.
That's really interesting. Well, thank you, Josh, and thank you, Blake, for joining me this afternoon. And thank you to our viewers for tuning in. If you have any questions regarding business email compromise, please feel free to reach out to the Kivu team if you have any questions or security concerns. With that, we'll see you all next week.